two daily newspapers have now accepted an offer by the union locals to return to work. The action ends a strike that has lasted.
That's on the way. Stay with us here at 90.3 FM, WCPN.
Now in Washington, and I'm Noah Adams in Los Angeles. There are some red faces today in Silicon Valley. Computer maker Silicon Graphics has acknowledged that it sold 2 small supercomputers to a Russian lab that designs nuclear weapons. The U.S. company, the leading seller of high-performance computers and supercomputers, admits that it committed some errors in judgment when it...
Others who have simply vanished, and I was unable to find them in Moscow. Initially, the reports were that he'd given up about, a dozen or 15 people, and what I was able to establish was that he gave up a total of 25, which was the entire human asset force being used by the CIA and the Soviet Union.
And all of them seem to have been arrested sometime right after Ames became a spy in 1985.
That's correct. What happens is that Ames decides to become a spy. He sells the Soviet Union information. He realizes then that he is in great jeopardy because who better than Ames knows how well penetrated the Soviet Union is. And so what he does is the very next time he meets with the Soviet Union, he gives them the names of all the human assets, purely to protect himself. He knew these people would be arrested and eliminated.
In addition to compromising and perhaps causing the deaths of several individual spies, he also compromised a couple of operations. One of them I'd never heard of before. It was called TAW.
Now, both of these were kept secret until they were revealed in my book. TAW was an operation where the CIA managed to bribe a construction worker and actually plant a bug into a cable that was being run from the KGB First Chief Directorate on the outskirts of Moscow into Lubyanka. So they were actually able to hear and transcribe communications between the KGB. The second one was called Absorb, and it was really out of a James Bond movie. We wanted to figure out how many warheads were on each of the missiles that were being shipped from Moscow to the other side of the Soviet Union. So the scientists came up with this way of creating a super Geiger counter. They put this Geiger counter on part of a train car under the theory that the Trans-Siberian Highway, or the railroad, is the only way across the vast Soviet Union. So they actually put this on one side of the track in the hopes that it would encounter warheads coming in the other direction.
In that split second that the two trains were passing.
That's right. It was a rather ingenious idea. They did it 3 times. It didn't work. Finally, they got it prepared. They'd spent over $120 million, and Ames gave it up.
Interestingly, you're right that after Ames gave up that operation, the Japanese construction company that had made the specially designed railroad car to contain this Geiger counter paid a bribe to the Russians to conceal their involvement.
The KGB told me that they'd actually made money off this because they were so outraged that a Japanese company had been a front for the CIA that they threatened to expose them unless they were paid $500,000, which they told me they had been paid.
Aldrich Ames, while he was at the CIA and after he had become a traitor and was spying for the KGB, did such things as debrief Soviet agents who were compromising the Soviet Union by talking to the U.S., very prominent ones before he became a spy. Even after he was under suspicion, do I have this right, he was placed in charge of a group that was supposed to work on destroying the post-Soviet KGB.
That's absolutely correct. During the 70s and 80s, he was the CIA's main man when it came to debriefing high-level defectors, high-level spies. This carried him through his career. At the collapse of the Soviet Union, he was called in and he was actually ordered to put, in the exact words, a stake in the heart of the KGB. He actually was the man who was writing memos for CIA executives that were being sent to Gorbachev and others.
Ames's main self-rationalization, self-justification, is that it's all a game. They're out there gathering intelligence, they bring it back, and the U.S. always ignores their evidence. There's another one, though, which seems to be a kind of an intellectual snobbery, which is, my country has turned shabby and commercial while I've been living overseas. I can't relate to it anymore.
Yes, he became disillusioned during the Reagan age with the country. He became disillusioned with the agency. And he felt like he knew more than the agency did about what was good for U.S. affairs with the Soviet Union. He also got into something which he harped upon, which is he talked continuously about people such as Henry Kissinger and how Kissinger had, in his opinion, committed treason. So what was the big deal with him doing this also?
Well, Pete Early, thank you very much for talking with us.
Thank you.
Pete Early's book is called Confessions of a Spy, The Real Story of Aldrich Ames. This is NPR, National Public Radio.
Support for National Public Radio comes from NPR member stations and IDI, innovative developer of distribution and warehouse facilities coast to coast. IDI, Aircast, pioneering functional pneumatic support for orthopedic injuries. And Lifetime Television, presenting Dinner with Oprah and her dinner guest Toni Morrison, author of Song of Solomon, Monday night, February 24th. This is NPR, National Public Radio.
Support for this program is provided by Office Furniture USA, 50% off every day. A catalog is available at 781-0725, a division of S. Rose, 781-0725. Let's find out how our ride home is going. Here's Holly Grant.
Hey, Jeff, as we continue to take a look at the afternoon rush hour, the Innerville southbound slow from Chester to 77, then from East 9th over to the 90 split. 77 southbound slow from 490 to Grant, and 271 southbound past Chagrin, an accident, traffic slow heading down towards I-480, and an accident on Rocky River Drive just north of I-480. Watch yourself through there. A lot of emergency vehicles on the scene. That's the latest from Metro Traffic Control, brought to you by the Metro Health Medical Center for 90.3 FM. I'm Holly Grant.
All right, let's clear something up right now. You don't have to win the Super Bowl to go to Disney World. Oh, sure, that might be the easy way, but ours is a lot less dangerous. WCPN's Adventures in Public Radio begins Friday. And if we draw your name, you and your traveling companion will be winging your way to beautiful Orlando, Florida. Stay tuned to 90.3 WCPN for more information on Adventures in Public Radio. No, you don't have to win the Super Bowl. And besides, how are we going to have a Super Bowl in Cleveland, at least for a while?
Well, the weather forecast for tonight, decreasing cloudiness, colder, and a low in the upper 20s. For tomorrow, mostly sunny in the morning, increasing cloudiness during the afternoon, and a high around 50. Rain developing for Thursday night, low in the mid-40s. Currently 39 degrees.
For National Public Radio News in Washington, I'm Ann Taylor. Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping has died at the age of 92. President Clinton said today that Deng was a driving force behind the move to normalize relations with the United States, and that he played a key part in world affairs because he decided to open China to the outside world. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright is in London, where she met today with top government officials. She said that it will be a great advantage to China and the rest of the world if there is a smooth transition of power in Beijing. NPR's Michael Goldfarb in London has more on the story.
Top of the agenda at today's meetings was NATO's eastward expansion, but that item was overshadowed by the death of Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping. The announcement was made while Secretary of State Albright was meeting with British Foreign Secretary Malcolm Rifkind. At a brief press conference, the Secretary of State praised Deng for his role in leading China through a time of transition, then offered a frank assessment of how Deng would be remembered.
I think that, as with many people, it will be a mixed remembrance. I think clearly the Tiananmen Square actions were very troublesome to everybody that has been following the issue of human rights in China.
Albright's trip continues tomorrow with a visit to Russia. I'm Michael Goldfarb in London.
Whitewater Independent Counsel Kenneth Starr says that his investigation will almost certainly continue past the 1st of August, when he is slated to become Dean of Law at Pepperdine University. Starr said that key decisions have yet to be made. NPR's Peter Kenyon reports.
Kenneth Starr's decision to step down was greeted with relief and elation at the White House. The assumption was that Starr would not indict either the President or First Lady and then abandon his post. Speaking to an audience of Virginia attorneys, Starr said those who argue that the investigation is over are wrong, and there's a difference between reality and spin.
The reality is this. This investigation is active, and it is at a sensitive stage, with ongoing evaluative judgments. Those judgments have not been made.
Starr acknowledged that the announcement of his leaving could have been handled better. In other developments, the Justice Department will not remove Starr for alleged conflicts of interest. and Starr categorically denied a report that his office conducted mock trials of the President and First Lady and failed to get convictions. I'm Peter Kenyon in Washington.
In Detroit, the city's daily newspapers have accepted back-to-work offers from striking unions. Half a dozen union locals have been on strike for 19 months. Newspaper executives say they plan to bring back workers as openings occur. On Wall Street, the Dow Jones Industrials closed down 47 points to end at 7,020.13 on volume of 519 million shares. This is NPR News. In a 7-2 ruling, the U.S. Supreme Court has decided in a Maryland case that police may order passengers, as well as drivers, to get out of a car during a routine traffic stop. U.S. Attorney General Janet Reno had argued the case as a friend of the court. Chief Justice William Rehnquist wrote for the majority that traffic stops may be dangerous encounters and that 11 police officers were killed in 1994 during routine traffic stops. Defense attorneys in the Oklahoma City bombing case today tried to cast doubts on eyewitness accounts that could be called to identify bombing suspect Timothy McVeigh as the man who rented the Ryder truck believed used in the explosion. NPR's Mark Roberts reports from Denver.
FBI sketch artist Raymond Rosicki testified he made the composite drawing of John Doe number 1, later identified as Timothy McVeigh. The description of the suspect came from Elliott's body shop mechanic Thomas Kessinger. Once the drawing was complete, Rosicki testified Kessinger was very sure that was close to what he remembered. Gene Boylan, another sketch artist, worked with Kessinger on his description of a second man, John Doe number 2, but Boylan testified she would have liked to work with Kessinger on the first drawing because his memory was much stronger. She also said Kessinger told her he looked at the man because he seemed to be chewing tobacco in both cheeks. Kessinger has also said he focused on the man because Elliott's body shop secretary Vicki Beamer commented that she'd been married longer than the truck renter had been alive. Testimony today also included when Kessinger took part in a photo lineup of 8 men displayed in the lineup. Kessinger took just 5 to 10 seconds to pick McVeigh as the man who rented the truck used in the bombing. I'm Mark Roberts in Denver.
In trading today in Europe, the dollar moved up against other major foreign currencies. Gold prices were also up. I'm Ann Taylor, NPR News in Washington.
Support for NPR comes from the Center for Entrepreneurial Leadership at the Kauffman Foundation, accelerating entrepreneurship in America, home of www.entreworld.org.
Jeff, an accident now on 71 southbound, right at West 150th.
Next year are being talked about today. Or perhaps somebody at precisely this moment is scribbling down a concept on a napkin. Exterior shot, intersection of Hollywood Boulevard and Cherokee. This neighborhood these days is indeed a bit more garish than grand, but it's still a good place to have an office if you're a screenwriter. Interior shot, room with a window, a table, a telephone, a laptop computer, a man with a dark beard wearing a white shirt and jeans. We've come to talk about the art of selling ideas. Stephen Tolkien was a baby of the business. His dad was the head writer for Sid Caesar's Show of Shows. Stephen Tolkien went to Yale Architecture School, but pretty much he knew he'd be a writer. He sold the first movie script idea he pitched to a studio, and he has a development deal now with HBO for a series about Sigmund Freud. He simply mentioned that one day to a producer, but he's had his embarrassments and doesn't like pitching.
You know in Gone with the Wind, when Scarlett O'Hara wants to go ask Rhett for the $300 and for the taxes on Tara, and she can't go because she has nothing to wear, so she turns her mother's curtains into this fabulous dress. Because what she has to do is go and convince Rhett that she doesn't need the money. You sit there in the room and basically dress yourself in your mom's green curtains and create this illusion that you absolutely don't need the money that you're asking them to give you to write something.
Because you've done this, you've done that, you don't...
Yes, you just make yourself sound as just everything is as great as it could be. But there's a lie built into that, usually. Certainly in pitching features. Because what you're asking them to do is have more faith in you than you have in yourself. And ultimately, every time you go and pitch an idea instead of writing it on spec, it's an act of no faith in yourself. You're coming to them and you're saying, I want you to hire me because I don't have faith enough to write the script myself.
Would you go with 2 ideas, 3 ideas?
I never pitch more than one idea.
One idea.
Because then you're really saying, I'm looking for work.
Sure, right.
That's really, you're ripping off the green curtains, you're showing Rhett the calluses on your hand.
It's just amazing to me to think that you can go into an executive's office and say something, and all of a sudden some money starts to move based on that.
Yes, it is astonishing, isn't it? You can go in and say a few words and get a huge check a couple of weeks later. And you can really get yourself in trouble, too, because sometimes you can pitch something and you can be so good at the pitch meeting, so eloquent and charismatic, that you can pitch something that you actually have no ability to write. I've seen people's scripts that they sold in a blaze of glory as a pitch that just amounted to nothing.
You can't say
Mine too, I would have to say. I think I've run into that, yes. Because I'm a really good pitcher. I'm good at it. I learned in architecture school how to pitch. When you're in architecture school, you spend 3 or 4 months designing a building or a complex of buildings or a vast museum in Iran for the Shah of Iran or something. All your favorite architects in the world come to the crit. At the end of this 4-month period, all the architects whose buildings you love, they come there and they stand there and they're ready to just tear you to shreds. And you've got your buildings up on the wall and you don't say, the front door is here. You say, this building is about the axis from the port to the mountains. It catches the vector of energy from the sea to the peaks of Hymettus or whatever it is. And then they're rolling with you. That's how I learned how to pitch.
From Stephen Tolkien's office on Hollywood Boulevard to a high-rise building close to Beverly Hills and a different approach to pitching. Go in with several ideas to talk about and go in positive.
Ideas are worth billions. So when I walk into a room, I don't assume that they think I have just another idea. My mother may just have another idea. I don't. I have Star Wars.
Robert Cosberg, writer and producer, has been involved with lots of projects. He was the executive producer of the hit movie 12 Monkeys. He is known in town as a great pitcher. He collects stories, writers, actors, and takes the ideas to one of the money people. One morning he brought some pitches to David Higgins, a development executive with Cloud 9 Productions, a company formed by the producers of Speed. Interior scene, 2 men, one on the couch, one on a chair. Robert Cosberg speaks first.
I mean, I have everything from thrillers to romantic comedies to action.
Right.
And I'm just wondering if I should just give you kind of an overview.
I think, as always, I mean, like everybody else, we're looking for the high concept hook on it, but we're going to be more likely right now to try and, fill the conference with some more action pieces, because that's right. And right now we're making the next 6, 7 films that get made. They're almost all comedies and family films, surprisingly enough, and one big drama.
Well, I'll start
with
one that's a bigger action picture that has some big set pieces. And actually, Don Granger, the executive that we both know over at Paramount, recommended these writers. Do you know Joe Gayton and Pat Cirillo?
Yes.
They write separately and sometimes
exactly
together.
Right.
They hooked up with me, and we started talking about a project called The Escape. And I'll give you the short version, then if you like it, I'd have them come in and tell you the long pitch. Basically, the concept, though, is a guy who deals cards for the mob. In other words, he wanted to be a magician. He wanted to be David Copperfield. He got into drugs, and he became Nick Cage in Leaving Las Vegas. And instead of ever becoming David Copperfield, who now works down the street in Vegas making billions, this is a guy who's drunk or on drugs, and every now and then the phone rings, and it's the local mob in Vegas who wants him to deal a big card game because obviously he can cheat.
He can move the cards.
He can move the cards. So he's got this down-and-out job. He has no self-respect. We see him do a few games with the mob where he helps the mob win, and then they supply him with the drugs in return.
Right.
So they've got him under their thumb. And then one day they call him in and say they have a bigger job for him. They want him to break somebody out of jail. Not somebody that the mob likes, somebody that the mob wants dead. Because this guy in jail can be testifying against somebody high up any day now. So he's always bragged about his great illusionistic abilities. They want to see him do it for real. So the fun is watching him in the next big set piece go behind the scenes, sort of like the movie FX. And in fact, we watch how he sets up the whole illusion, breaks the guy, the big set piece of breaking the guy to prison by the midpoint of the movie. And the second half of the film, we've now got, it's kind of like The Rock in that way. The second part is you've now got that Sean Connery character who was broken out of prison in the car with our illusionist. And the two of them are heading down the strip, and our guy is thinking, geez, I've done this great job, but now I've got to take this guy basically to be killed. He knows what the mob is going to do to this guy. And the second half is how, all on Midnight Run, how these two guys hook up to really screw the mob. For now, it's called The Escape. Cirillo and Gayton write good action. If the concept of this kind of character, who I think is an eccentric, interesting kind of guy, using magic and illusions a la FX as our hook for the movie, appeals to this company, then I'd have the writers come in.
I mean, I think he's probably a little bit too dark for mainstream, and I think you want to lighten him up a little bit.
Probably true.
But I think you still want him to be a down-and-out magician who...
never made it.
Exactly.
The pitch meeting goes on, with David Higgins hearing ideas about a comedy action film, a black comedy involving 2 older actors, a medical thriller, a Houdini return story. Robert Cosberg is from Arcadia, suburban Los Angeles. He didn't want to be in his family's clothing business. He studied film in college, and now he sits in his office wearing a black cashmere sweater and black jeans and gets to talk about movies all day.
I like stories. I like finding good stories, creating good stories, telling good stories. When I go on these pitch meetings, I've already seen the stories. In other words, I've seen the movies. They haven't been up on a big screen yet, but they're in my head. I hold private screenings in my mind for a party of one, me, and I watch the movie. That's how I can pitch it so well. It's like when you see a movie on Friday night, and you tell one of your friends,
right,
Saturday, the movie you saw,
right,
you're pitching.
Right. Now, you were not, though, I noticed there was a modulation to your excitement.
Sure.
You were down a little bit.
Sure.
You didn't want to be...
Overly crazy.
Did you change for each person?
Oh, sure. For each person, depending on how excited they get, I probably come up.
Mm-hmm.
If I start to sense that they're really getting excited, I probably get more excited than I should. But if they're fairly low-key, it's inappropriate for me to be jumping all over the room. And then you feel like you're just a circus performer. It's bad enough going into pitch, because most of us in the army of pitchers, the pitch brigade of Hollywood, you recognize what deep down you really are. You are a beggar. And no matter how good the project is, you might be pitching the Mother Teresa story that should be winning Nobel Prizes, but you're still on the floor saying, please believe me, this is a story that deserves to be told. And you're talking to money people who may have no creative sense of why your story is a good story. And that's one of the dilemmas of the movie business. Quote, creative people are trying to convince financial business people to share the same understanding of story. And they don't want to talk necessarily about why it's a good story. They want to talk about why it's going to make a lot of money, which is what their job is.
I noticed David almost sort of organically wanted to start tweaking the story ideas.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, that happens a lot.
Happens a lot.
And we want that to happen.
Uh-huh.
It's a very sinister Machiavellian aspect of pitching. You want the listener to become your collaborator, because then by the time he goes to pitch it to his boss,
right,
it's his story and he has a vested interest. He's no longer pitching Bob Cosberg's project. He's pitching his project, and I'm lucky if my name gets mentioned. But that's okay, because he still knows he has to call me back and negotiate. I'm thrilled for him to take all the credit.
When somebody screws up a pitch, what are they doing wrong?
There are so many things that can go wrong, but I'll give you the basics. Number one, they're walking in without enough enthusiasm, so that if they don't have it, why should the listener? Number two, they've picked a subject matter that is already too familiar or wrong-headed, in the sense that the studios have no interest in making a movie about three lesbians on Venus. And lastly, I think they don't pitch things in a summarized fashion. They think because they have such a great story that they need to share every detail. I made a preliminary sale and generated some income off of a one-line idea. I mean, I got it down to one word once. I went to Disney and pitched Monopoly, which is a great one word because it's the world's greatest selling game. And I didn't even own the rights. But the funny thing is, I learned very quickly that if nobody else owns the rights other than Parker Brothers, and you walk into a studio and suggest it, then the studio goes and buys the rights. So,
what did they say when you said Monopoly, though?
They said exactly what you would think. They said, well, what's the story?
Right.
And I said, well, I think it's such a great idea for a movie, to do a movie, just the concept of trying to make a movie out of the game. Why don't we try to meet with writers? I mean, you immediately try to get them pregnant. So then they suggested Mario Puzo. Well, I didn't know Mario Puzo, but I called him and said, would you be interested in writing Monopoly? Because at least he was interested in gambling. And Mario said, sure. And he flew out to California, and I thought, this is going to be great. Mario's going to be the answer to my dreams, and he's going to tell the studio executives how to do Monopoly. And I'll just sit there and take all the credit. And Mario got in the room and lit up his cigar, and the studio executive said, okay, Mario, we're ready to be bathed in your brilliance. Tell us how to do Monopoly. And he said, pay me, which I thought was quite brilliant of him, because his point was well taken. As he said to me later, after everyone kind of picked themselves up from fainting, why should he think for free? The figuring out of the story, the figuring out of the question you just asked. How do you do Monopoly? That's the hard part. Writing it down, he said, would be easy.
Robert Cosberg, talking with us at his office in Los Angeles. He also says it helps to connect a star with a story, and he's helping a co-writer friend with a project that Kevin Costner has said yes to. Costner would play a Pat Riley-type professional basketball coach. A Michelle Pfeiffer type would play a sports psychologist. The movie would be called Basket Cases.
Wizards of Lava, up next on NPR's All Things Considered.
Local support for this portion of All Things Considered is provided by Super Blue from Northeast Ohio Community Health Plan. Super Blue offers access to thousands of doctors in more than 40 hospitals in Northeast Ohio. Good evening. The lava flows down by George Simpson's partner on Dante's Peak is Richard Anderson. His company, Weddington Productions, has 3 Academy Awards for sound effects editing and another nomination last week. He describes with delight an idea that somebody on his staff came up with to help with the sound of volcano bombs flying through the air. Tie nuts in a plastic bag, a dry cleaner's bag, and set it on fire.
You light this thing from the bottom and it burns up, but as the plastic drops to the ground, it makes these great kind of sounds.
Dante's Peak takes place in the Cascade Mountains. There's a small town threatened by an awakening volcano. This movie from Universal Pictures is in theaters now, and there's another one coming, adding a certain competitive pressure. 20th Century Fox is bringing out Volcano, and this eruption is in Los Angeles, right up through the La Brea tar pits. Christopher Boyes of Skywalker Sound up in Marin County, California, has been working on the lava noise for Volcano. Often he can use elements he's recorded before.
This is actually a sound that while I was recording ambiences down in the rainforest, I was constantly standing in 12 inches or so of thick mud, and I started playing with my boots, sort of pulling them in and out, and this is a sound that I made from that. A great sweetener for points in the film when the lava is actually interacting with something or moving physically on screen.
Christopher Boyes also had instructions from his director, Mick Jackson. Jackson wasn't thinking documentary so much. He wanted to hear his lava come alive.
He wanted it to be sort of like a dragon that had come up from the center of the earth and had a living, breathing, powerful presence.
How do you get that sense of something coming up from something that's alive actually coming up?
In the case of the lava, I use things such as steaming fissures and bubbling crags from Yellowstone, but then I wove in actual animal sounds as tightly as I could so that it didn't sound like an animal per se, but something blended in that created sort of a breathing presence that gave the lava life. I think this one is a sort of a mixture of bubbles and snakes. Another interesting thing that occurred during the course of working on the sound for this film is the unfortunate ValueJet incident. They did a test of what kind of heat it would take to melt through steel and things like that, and we heard it on a news program and called up the transportation board and got a copy of that sound, and then I took the sound and started playing with it in the studio, and I actually ended up using it for a scene in a subway where lava's coming down through the tube and it's heating steel rails, basically melting them, and it has a very ghostly, eerie feeling, and it goes like this.
When the movie Volcano is mixed on a soundstage, choices will be made from the digital palette of sounds that Christopher Boyes has prepared. And the idea is to use just a few sounds and not a multi-layered effect.
What we're really going for is articulation, and it's sort of like a bottle. If you put too many sounds in there, it's going to just sort of overflow and not be useful.
And that's true of digital technology as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the art of sound is isn't enhanced by digital technology per se. I mean, there's sort of a physical law of the amount of sounds that you can blend together. So while digital technology's brought us a lot of new toys and a lot of ways to do things differently than we have in the past, it's still an art form that is bound to the original physical laws it always has been.
Sometimes, though, it seems like it would be fun to put all the stuff together and have the sounds explode and rumble out through those big theater woofers. George Simpson and Richard Anderson did get to do just that for Dante's Peak, creating a pyroclastic flow, a super hot cloud of gas and ash rock that destroys the town below.
It's very much like an atomic bomb blast. And of course, in a reality, it would probably go through real fast and be done. You'd be dead, or somehow you survive, but it'd be gone real fast. But of course, in a movie, we tend to dramatically stretch these moments.
And from what we were told, it's probably the loudest sound you'll ever hear on Earth.
George Simpson and Richard Anderson, sound supervisors for Dante's Peak. We also talked with Christopher Boyce, who's been working on the forthcoming film Volcano.
You're listening to NPR's All Things Considered.
Support for NPR comes from NPR member stations and the Central Eurasia Project of the Open Society Institute, supporting coverage of the Transcaucasus and Central Asia, the National Science Foundation supporting education and research in science, math, and technology, the Colgate-Palmolive Company, and the National Education Association, more than 2 million Americans working for better schools and colleges. This is NPR, National Public Radio.
And this is your NPR station, 90.3 FM, WCPN Cleveland, the sound of ideas. Let's find out how our ride home is wrapping up. Here's Holly Grant.
As we take a look at the highways, Jeff,